You want me to say something, Jerry? Test the volume. Okay. All right. So my voice won't be amplified, but it will be on the live stream. So thank you for coming, and thank you to Jen, my friend who drove 40 minutes to get here today. Thank you for coming. And anyone who will watch this afterwards online or is watching live. So I had a really remarkable trip to Wales in June. And what I want to do this morning, I'm going to show you some pretty pictures of places that I visited, but I also want to give you a sense for the remarkable spiritual traditions of Wales, and especially the sites relating to the early Celtic Christian period, the 5th and 6th centuries, which is a fascinating and surprisingly influential part of Christian history, one that's undergoing a renaissance in a lot of ways right now. So I'm going to be talking about that. I hope Mel will jump in at certain times. Mel has been a scholar of the early Celtic Christian period for a long time. I know he's been to a lot of the sites that I'm going to be talking about. So we have two people who can sort of talk to some of these subjects. So a little bit of orientation on Wales. First of all, how many of you have been to Wales? Okay, a few people. Okay. Well, to refresh your memory, and to those of you who haven't been, Wales is this area right here. The blue dots indicate places that I visited. It's part of the United Kingdom. It is a separate nation, though, with a long tradition. It's one of the oldest nations in the world. Very strong sense of national pride. It is about the size of New Jersey. It's not a large country, but it is a surprisingly influential country on world history. I don't claim in any means to be an expert on Wales history or culture or spirituality or religious history, but I learned a lot when I was there. And so I'm hoping the broad outlines of what I say are correct, even if I may get some of the dates wrong. So how I ended up in Wales. About 2 years ago, I got an email out of the blue from this woman, Jennifer Brenner, who lives in Wales. She follows my work. I'm a writer, as I'm sure most of you know. Follows my work, and she said, I would love to tour sacred sites in Wales with you. And if you would ever like to come, I would love to do a trip, just the two of us. And I was immediately intrigued. Not that I think you should go off with people who contact you on the internet at random, but it was such a lovely note. And she went on at some length about her background and why she was interested in such things and why she liked my work and why she thought I needed to come to Wales. She said, as far as I can tell, you've never written about Wales, and you really need to, she said, because there are remarkable things here. So we arranged to meet. Her mother lives in Chicago, and so last Christmas we met for lunch. And so I didn't go off with a total stranger to Wales, but it just turned out marvelously. She is a wonderful, wonderful person. I hope sometime she might come to Iowa City. Now we'll bring her to church. She works for the National Church Organization of the Unitarian Church in the UK, and has a long-standing interest in spirituality, defined very broadly. She was actually born in Chicago. She's of Brazilian, Italian, German descent, but has lived in Wales for 20 years and speaks Welsh, which is a remarkable feat for anyone who hasn't grown up speaking Welsh. It is an extraordinarily difficult language, but it shows her commitment to the culture, to being a full citizen there. She lives in a small village called Dolgellau, I think that's how you pronounce it, in Snowdonia National Park, and one of the most beautiful parts of Wales. And she was a great guide. Little example of how difficult Welsh is. Welsh is actually, it's one of the Celtic languages, but it's, so if you think of Gaelic, what they speak in Ireland, well, Welsh is on a whole different branch of the Celtic language tree. It's closer to Breton, which is spoken in Brittany in France, which is also a Celtic land. And that Celtic designation goes back a long, long time ago. It has to do with a cultural group that came from mainland Europe and really developed strongholds in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Brittany, Isle of Man, and has a distinctive culture, cultural traditions that are still in play today. So, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to do my slides in the order that I experienced these places. I've grouped them more thematically instead. Basically, what we did was a big circle around the perimeter of Wales. And so I'm going to talk about 4 prehistoric sites first, and then I'm going to get into the heart of the Celtic Christian story. I think this was the single most impressive monument that I visited in Wales. It's called Pentre Ifan, and I'm going to probably mangle some of the pronunciations, but you guys don't know what the right pronunciations are, so that's okay. So this is on the Pembrokeshire Peninsula, and we don't know why it was built, but it obviously was built at great effort. This is called the Floating Stone of Wales. It is a remarkable thing when you realize that prehistoric peoples thousands of years ago lifted that stone and it's balanced just right on those 3 uprights there. For quite some time, archaeologists thought it was a burial chamber. Now the thinking has shifted on that, and they think it is somehow relates to what's in the background. The blue hills there are the Preseli Hills, which are famous for their blue stones. They're called blue because, especially when they have some water on them, they really do look blue. And Stonehenge, I'm sure you've heard of Stonehenge in England, part of the stones at Stonehenge are blue stones, and they were quarried right back here. And the Preseli Hills are full of all sorts of archaeological sites. So something about those hills was sacred. Something about them caused prehistoric peoples at enormous effort to quarry them in the hills and then transport them overground for, I don't know, at least 50 miles, and then take them by the sea to the coast of England and then inland again. We don't know why, but it's almost like this monument is a frame of that. And it is, I think, sort of a metaphor for Wales in general. A lot of what we know about spiritual traditions in Wales is speculation, is mystery, but it's riveting in its own way, especially if you have a taste for off-the-beaten-path places.
How tall is that?
Probably 10 feet tall. 10. Mm-hmm. You could easily stand underneath it. Yeah.
Are those blue stones?
Yes, these are also blue stones. Yes. Mm-hmm. Which probably, I think, were quarried there as well. Yeah. Another site that we went to that I was really impressed by, this is the Druid Circle. It's in North Wales. You have to trek maybe about an hour to get here. It's called the Druid Circle, but it wasn't built by Druids because the Druids came long after these stones were put. This is from the Neolithic age. But it's taken on the name of the Druid Circle just in popular imagination. The Druids were the pre-Christian priestly class of Wales. They were known for their love of oak trees in particular. They were the lawgivers, they were the judges. The Romans wrote about the Druids, and that's why we know about them. They themselves did not leave any written records. But the Druids have come back in a number of ways, and I'll tell you about that in just a minute. Another really impressive site we went to is, get the spelling, Trier Carey Hill Fort. So hill forts were built, again, in the Neolithic age at a promontory. They were settlements, and in the lore that followed, they often became associated with myths. And so this is called the Town of Giants. So this is the walk up, and then you get to the not at the very top of the mountain, but it's on like on a promontory sort of jutting out from the mountain. It's one of the best preserved hill forts, Neolithic hill forts in Britain. And it's just a magical place once you're up there. Windy and full of places to sit and watch the landscape. So that's Jennifer perched up there. And then I want to tell you about a really remarkable experience I had. Some of you maybe get my newsletter, and so you heard about this. So I was there in the summer solstice, and when Jennifer realized I was going to be on the summer solstice, she said, I know someone who knows the chief druid of Anglesey Island, and I'm going to see if we can get us invited to their summer solstice celebration. And so that's what we did. We got up, I think it was 3 o'clock in the morning, so we could drive and get to the place and walk. And it was one of the most remarkable religious rituals that I've ever had the chance to be part of. So it's at a place called Bryn Celyn Ddu, and this is a Neolithic burial chamber. So you enter here and on the other side. And it's aligned so that on the sunrise of the summer solstice, the sunlight enters into the heart of the burial chamber. Now, it's Wales, and so it's usually cloudy, as it was that morning. But still, it is a remarkable prehistoric monument. And there was a Druid ceremony there. So I'm sure you've seen pictures of what goes on at Stonehenge in England. And so this is actually, I think, a more authentic version of it, because the group that is doing it, this is the chief druid, who is the cousin of a friend of hers. He is largely responsible for sort of bringing back a school of druids in Wales, and with study and practice, and he is a real character, as you can imagine. And so the ceremony started before dawn, lasted for about an hour, and there were many familiar parts to it, of anyone who has been through a church service. There were prayers, and there were some chants. There was a marriage that took place in the middle of it. And all the while, we were waiting for the time of the sunrise. And like I said, it was cloudy, so I think they looked mainly at their watch instead of the horizon. But when the sun came up, we all turned towards, this is the burial chamber inside. We all turned towards the rising sun on the summer solstice, and we greeted it. And it just was an experience that sort of sent shivers, down your spine. This sense of humans have been greeting the rising sun on the solstice for millennia. And it was a bit kooky, I must say, but it was also, there was deep meaning in it as well. It was a real privilege to be part of it. Yes? Mm-hmm. Sure.
So in the left-hand side, is that just the sun rising? Is that what I'm seeing over there?
Oh. No, it's not the sun, because the sun would have come up over here. I think it might be.
That looks like it's lit too.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what I'm looking at.
Yeah, it might be just a trick of the camera, because it wouldn't have been, there were no cities nearby. The rising sun was over on the other side. I don't know. I had not noticed that before. Yeah. The ceremony of lighting this at the top there reminded me of what we do, a lot of churches do on Easter Vigil, on Easter morning, where a flame is lit. Something very archetypal about that.
they on top of the barrel around?
You could walk all over it. Yeah. No, they were on the outside of it, but then afterwards people wandered all over it. It's well stabilized, I guess. No one seemed to be worried about walking on it. I thought too, like, this is a valuable ancient monument. Do you think you should be walking on it? But they were. So that's me and the chief druid. I look a little worse for wear because I've been up since 3. Really interesting man. So now we're going to shift gears, and I want to talk about the early Celtic Christian period in Wales, how they're promoting it, how they're preserving it, and how you can tour it if you would be interested. So they have a route called the North Wales Pilgrim's Way, which you can walk. It takes about 2 weeks, and it's about, I think, 125 miles. It's primarily across the north part of Wales, and it is a route that connects many of the major sites that I'll be showing you, relating to this period that was a flowering of Christianity in the 5th and 6th centuries. Brief history of Wales: it was invaded by the Romans, and the Romans brought Christianity to Wales, but it tended to be limited to just a few urban areas, and urban areas in that period were not real big in the 3rd century. And then when the Romans left Wales in like 500, Christianity sort of died down, and then there was a flowering of Celtic. They were now called Celtic saints, the age of Celtic saints. Those saints in the broader sense of holy people who dedicated themselves to spreading the word of Christ. Most of them are names you would not be familiar with, other than Saint David, who was the patron saint of Wales. Weird names, weird stories, weird people. And it was so fun to learn about their stories, and I'll be telling a few of their stories. So the North Wales Pilgrim's Way. This is reproduced a little bit small, but so this is the route. It starts up here, and at St. Winifred's Well, and goes all the way down to Bardsey Island. There are other sites in Wales worth visiting too, but this is the route that's really connected to the Celtic Christian period. So the first stop is St. Winifred's Well. This is said to be the oldest place of continuously visited pilgrimage in the UK, in Britain. The story is that there was a young woman, Winifred, who rejected the advances of a man, a local noble, and in retaliation, he chopped off her head. And where her head bounced, a spring started. And luckily, her uncle was a famous saint, Saint Bueno. Nothing to do with Spanish, just Saint Bueno. And he restored her head and sent the bad guy down to the depths of hell. And the spring then became associated with healing. And it was many of these holy sites were shut down when King Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries. And so if you know a little bit of, remember your English history, Henry VIII wanted to take control of the church for dynastic reasons. And he also, the monasteries were wealthy and very tempting to take back into the crown. And so most places were repressed. A lot of these places were repressed, except this site, which had as his patron, I think she was the grandmother of King Henry VIII. But anyway, she kept it as sort of her private place. And so as a result, there's this unbroken tradition of pilgrimage at St. Winifred's Well. Here's the center of it. You can see the well water coming up here. It's sort of a star-shaped chamber there. Here's Jennifer stepping into the pool outside. The tradition is that you immerse yourself 3 times, and it is really cold water. Really, really cold water. So we didn't see anyone do that, but it's still a place of active pilgrimage, clearly. It is affiliated with the Roman Catholic church. And so there are services that are held there, and it's still very much a living holy site.
Is it like Lourdes and people come and leave artifacts?
No, they don't. No. There is a small museum there that tells the history of it, but it's not, I mean, it's small. All of these places are small, I would say, other than maybe St. David's Cathedral. So another site on the way is, this is a tree, but this is a special tree. This is the oldest yew tree in Britain. It's 4,000 years old, approximately, and it is located in a churchyard. Yews were sacred to the pre-Christian peoples of Wales, and so almost certainly the church was built there because it was already a holy site. And there's Jennifer lying in the middle of this tree. It is just an amazing experience. It is like a nest in there. That is a single tree, and it's so old that it's sort of broken apart. It's just a remarkable place. And very, I think, indicative of what holy sites in Wales are about. They're places where you have to sort of spend time with them and be with them, and there's not a lot of frou-frou around them. You just have to know the story behind them and sink into it. And so the yew tree, and it's got a long Welsh name that I'm not even going to try to butcher, but...
Laurie?
Uh-huh.
Was the churchyard circular?
I can't remember, actually, which would have been another indication that it would have been pagan. Yeah.
That's often a tip-off to a pre-Christian site.
Mm-hmm.
The churchyard is circular instead of square.
Yeah, that's one of the characteristics of early Christianity in Wales, was this blending of traditions. A lot of Druids became Christian leaders because they were educated. They already had the respect of the community, and a lot of them took to Christianity pretty easily, apparently. I love the Holy Well tradition of the British Isles. If you've been to Ireland, I'm sure you've seen holy wells. Wales also has a lot of holy wells. This is the well of St. Cubby. There I am, there. I like this picture with the sky reflected in there. It's abandoned, but it's protected by the Welsh National Government. And people just show up. Yeah, you can find it on the internet, you can find it in guidebooks, and you come and sit and hear the birds, and there you are. Another major site along the North Wales Pilgrims Way is Llan Island. So Llan, L-L-A-N, is in a lot of a lot of Welsh words. It means an enclosure or a church, sort of anglicized into a church. And so when you see that in front of a word, it means church of, basically. And so this was the church of Llanwyn, who is, I'm butchering that name. She's known as the sort of the Welsh St. Valentine's. She also had a bad experience in love. It's a long, complicated, miraculous story that I won't take the time to recount. But because of that story, she became associated with people who were seeking, who were saying prayers for fortune and love. And there was a well associated with her church that had magic eels in it, eels like fishy things. And so again, this blending of folklore and magic and mysticism and the church, and just, it is so Welsh. And this is a really beautiful place to visit. It's on a peninsula. The ruins of her church are there. And then it's also nature preserve. There's a lighthouse out there, and it's one of the most beautiful sites in Wales, I would say. Beautiful beach there too. Another holy well that we visited is St. Cyril's well. St. Cyril is also honored in the Orthodox calendar. Some of these really early Celtic saints also are on the Orthodox radar, because this was before the church separated between the Orthodox and the rest of Western Christendom. And I really like this holy well too. You can see it's an active well that people have thrown coins in there. And there's an active church associated with this one too. And then let's skip to Bardsey Island. So that's the culmination of the North Wales Trail. To get there, you have to take a boat like this. I think there are two tour companies, private tour companies. The weather conditions have to be right. It's only about a half an hour boat ride, but the currents are strong, and if there's much wind, it's not safe. And so the first day when we wanted to go, the conditions weren't right, so we shuffled around our schedule and went on the second day. Bardsey Island is the Welsh equivalent of Iona in Scotland or Lindisfarne in England, places that you might have heard of, places that have become really active places of pilgrimage once again. I'm sure some of you have been to Iona, probably in particular. Bardsey Island has the same sort of stature in Welsh history as those places do, as places of pilgrimage, but it doesn't have all the people, which is really nice. It's hard to get to, for one thing. The island is only about 3 miles long. I think there are 3 people who live there permanently. There's a lighthouse keeper also at the other end. And then there's a very, very small residential community that's basically for the summer. And I think there are like 7 different cottages that you have to rent by the week. Bardsey Island became famous, or became well known in this early Celtic Christian period. It was said that 3 pilgrimages to Bardsey were the equivalent of 1 to Rome. Now, one of the popes said that. But also, the folklore belief grew up that if you were buried on Bardsey Island, you wouldn't go through purgatory. And so it's said to be the island of 20,000 saints, and a lot of them came after their death. You know, the people would bring the bodies to Bardsey Island because they wanted them to have that direct line to heaven. And so during the 5th, 6th, 7th centuries, there was a steady stream of people going to Bardsey Island. There was a monastery there, and it is one of those places, one of those thin places, I think in part because it's so open. This is on the far western side of Wales, and there's, the next land is like North America here. And there's a cliff on one side, and so you don't see the mainland when you're there. It's an international dark sky park because the stars are so good there. There's so little light pollution.
So are there thousands of graves, or are they not marked?
They're not marked, no. So this is the remnant of a monastery or some kind of religious structure that was there. There's a contemporary Celtic cross that's there, and a small outdoor altar. There are retreats that are held at Bardsey Island, but there really isn't the facility to house people in any numbers, so.
I have a question.
Yes,
Since the Catholics don't believe in purgatory much anymore, so it's happened to Bardsey Island.
They don't I don't think you're allowed to bury people there anymore. And it's Wales, so it's really rocky. I don't know what they did with all those bodies, actually. You probably don't want to inquire too closely on that.
Also hurt the relics trade, though.
Yeah. This is a contemporary church there. It's an interdenominational chapel, and there's a pastor who's there throughout the summer. And so, people are continuously coming to Bardsey Island. It's just that it's still a remote, quiet place. So switching gears, we're going to go away from the North Wales Pilgrim's Way, and we're going to go to St. David's Cathedral, which is the Cathedral of Wales, named after the patron saint of Wales. St. David is very much associated with this tip of the Pembrokeshire coast, which is just a beautiful, beautiful coast. It's a national park all along the edge. It's just gorgeous, rocky sea coast. And so it's a big tourist area because of how beautiful it is, as well as its religious heritage. St. David's has a gorgeous setting where there's the small town of St. David's, which is actually called a city because it hosts a cathedral. They call it a city. It's the smallest city in Britain, even though it's only 5,000 people at most, even less than that. So the city is up here, and then you go down steps, and then The church is in the river valley down below, and it's just this exquisite setting and beautiful church, as you can see. Still a very active church. The architecture is a conglomeration of many different styles. At one point, the Vikings raided it, and a lot of stuff was taken and burned. And it's beautiful. It's not a huge church, not a huge cathedral, but active schedule of services. Jennifer and I happened to be there on a Sunday morning, and so we went to choral Eucharist there, which was it was really fun to have my time in Wales sort of bookended by the Druid ceremony on the summer solstice and then the choral Eucharist. There were a lot of similarities and a lot of differences between those. Outside of the cathedral are the ruins of the bishop's palace, and so during the medieval period, there was a lot of wealth in these cathedral cities. So the bishop lived in this wonderful place. This was a place where royal visitors were entertained and other people of wealth. It's now in ruins, and it's owned by the national government, and you can tour it if you'd like. About a 15-minute walk from the cathedral is St. Non's Bay and St. Non's ruins. And St. Non was the mother of St. David. And this is I took a picture of the sign there. So the story is that she gave birth on the seacoast by herself during a storm, and that a spring miraculously appeared so that she could baptize her young son. And there were all sorts of prophecies. St. David was doing miracles even before he was born, apparently. He was another of the wonder-working saints of Wales. And so it's really a lovely spot. There's a holy well there. And these are the ruins of St. Non's Chapel overlooking St. Non's Bay. And so everyone who goes to St. David's also goes to St. Non's. Not too far away is another remarkable chapel associated with St. Govan. I think that's how it's pronounced. So this is on the Pembrokeshire coast, and you walk along the coastal path, and then you go down a set of steps. The tradition is that the set of steps changes every time they're walked. And so, if you count them, it's a different number of steps going down than it is going up. This is, as you can see, built right into the cliff face. The ocean is right down here. It's really a magical place. One of the traditions associated with this chapel is that St. Govan was actually connected to Gawain, of Gawain and the Green Knight, of the King Arthur stories. There's lots of stories connected with it. But it's, again, one of these places that really evokes, I think, sort of the heart of this early Celtic Christian period, much more so than the Grand Cathedral at St. David's. This period of Celtic Christianity was much more about holy wells and small huts on the side of the sea, of places where holy people went to pray, to fast, to receive visions. And people would come to them then, but it wasn't an institutional church in the same way that we think of. And that became more inevitably that sort of wild spirit gets tamed. But you can still feel it in places like this in Wales. We also went to, this is down in the southern part of Wales, St. Illtud's at Llantwit Major, which is, it's a nice church, but it's like nothing special about it. But in the early Celtic Christian period, it was extraordinarily important. It is said, the first institution of higher learning in Britain. Of any size. And so men and women both were educated here. It's said that St. David was educated here. Hundreds of students came to learn how to read, to learn to be missionaries. And from this spot, Celtic missionaries went out throughout, especially the Celtic world, but also into the mainland Europe as well. And so they have done a nice job there of telling their story. At one end of the church, they have something called the Galilee Chapel, and these are very early Celtic stones that are carved with Christian symbolism that date back at least to the 6th century, if not before. And so they're very proud of their history there, and it's a good place to learn about the older traditions here. Oops. This is the inside of that church. So switching centuries here, another religious site that we went to that I thought was really fascinating was called Mary Jones' World. So in 1800, there was a young woman, Mary Jones, who lived in a remote part of the Snowdonia Mountains. And she had heard that there was a minister in the village of Bela who had some copies of the Bible in the Welsh language. And this was a time when English was the official language, and to have something in Welsh was really hard to get a hold of, especially a Bible. And so she walked, how many miles was it? It was something like 30 miles in one day, barefoot, to get one of these Bibles. She saved for like 8 years to have enough money. She shows up at the minister's door, and he said, "Oh, I've promised all the Bibles that I have, but I'll find a place for you to stay until I get another shipment." And so she stayed for several days. She got her Bible. She walked back home. But the clergyman who had the Welsh Bible was so impressed by her story, her determination, her willingness to work for all that time to buy a Bible, that he brought the story to London. And there was a circle of people in London at that time who included William Wilberforce, who some of you may recognize the name. He was very active in the abolitionist movement. And they founded what is now known as the Bible Society. And they did translations of the Bible that their goal was to make the Bible accessible in all languages. And that also had a great influence on the abolitionist movement in Britain. And so Mary Jones, what she did really turned out to have amazing ripples throughout British history. And so they have a lovely center. It's a church, no longer used as a church, but they have exhibits and videos there that talk about her. And here's a copy of the Welsh Bible. So it was an extraordinarily important thing, not only for what happened with Wilberforce, et cetera, but also in the saving of Welsh culture. It was translated in, I think, about early 1600s. And at that time, the Welsh language was splintering into dialects. And so what the Welsh Bible did was sort of fix the language. And because it was fixed, it meant that it could become a national language. It wouldn't just get lost. And so it also became the school book for generations of Welsh children. Because of the Welsh Bible, Wales was one of the most literate countries in Europe at the early age of the Industrial Revolution, because they had their Bibles and they used them. And so this deep reverence for the Holy Book is something that was threaded throughout early Welsh history, and that was part of the reason why Methodism took such root in Wales as well, much later with John Wesley. These reform movements found fertile ground in Wales. The last place that we toured was Tintern Abbey. And if you're an English major, as I was, you might know the famous poem associated with Tintern Abbey, written by William Wordsworth. Lines composed at Tintern Abbey, I think that's the name of it. This is a medieval abbey that is on the border between Wales and England on the River Wye. It was a large, another shot of the inside. This shows what it was like in its heyday. It was a Cistercian abbey, and then when King Henry VIII came and dissolved the monasteries, it went into ruin. But I'm going to go back to that. Oops. Tintern Abbey is, I think, the most beautiful ruin I've ever seen. It has a gorgeous setting, and the Gothic architecture frames the landscape. So when you're inside, you can see the greenery framed by the stone walls. It's no wonder that poets are inspired by it. And it became very, very popular in the 1800s in Britain as a place for tourism. It was probably the first real tourist attraction in England. Part of that was the fact that the Napoleonic Wars were raging in Europe, and so people couldn't travel abroad, so they decided to explore more in England and in Wales. So it's just a spectacular ruin. The artist Turner painted many pictures of Tintern Abbey, which added to its fame. And after you've seen Tintern Abbey, other ruins are sort of not quite as impressive. There you can see how the windows frame the landscape.
Are those people or flowers?
These are people that are doing renovation work in there.
Look how small they are in comparison with the...
Yeah. This isn't a Christian site or a holy site, but I guess for me it was. So this is the writing studio of Dylan Thomas, who was a poet in the early 1900s. They love him in Wales. You know, there's this long tradition of the bards, you know, of singers and harpists and artists who are celebrated and who are supported by the Welsh culture. Well, Dylan Thomas was a bard, and he had a beautiful writing studio on the edge of an estuary in rural Wales. He had a sad life. He died of alcoholism young, left behind 3 young children, and sad story, one of those classic sort of mad poet stories. But I was very moved by his studio. I also have to throw in at least one castle. Wales has more castles per square mile than any other country in the world, which is an indication of how much it was fought over by the Welsh and the English. This is, I'm blanking on the name, Halbrick Castle, I think? Harlech Castle. There's a famous song associated with this. So if you go to Wales, you have to visit castles. We didn't do very much of that, just because there was so much else that we did. But it's definitely worth.
Lori?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I've been to Wales several times. The first time I went to a castle was when we were together.
Oh, really? Oh, so you too have focused on the religious sites instead. Yeah.
Well, they were also, I mean, they come after 1066, which is a sign that the old culture had been superseded by the European invasion, the Roman invasion, and the monastic orders changed, and the new orders usually were resident in the shadow of the castle. So, in my primitive way, I was seeing them as the bad guys.
Which is a good segue for my next slide, and we'll. Okay, and you wonder how this is connected. So if you can see, there are 2 dogs right here. This is a postman in one of the small villages we visited, and I saw so many dogs in Wales, and I kept looking for a Welsh Corgi, because we have had Welsh Corgis, and I thought, I'm going to Wales, of course I'm going to see Welsh Corgis. I didn't see a single one, and Jennifer said that the reason, she thinks, is that they're so associated with the British royal family, and the Welsh do not like the Brits, or don't like the English, rather, for that reason, because of that long history of oppression. And so... and maybe it's partly as a result of that too, the Welsh love Americans. I felt sort of like a celebrity a number of times in Wales, because They don't get a huge number of tourists in Wales who come from abroad, and they're so proud of their country and their heritage and their history. And many people have Welsh connections, in the United States because of people who immigrated. And so it was really another reason to travel to Wales. Just a couple more slides here. So we absolutely packed it in. Jennifer is a real walker, and so every day from early in the morning till late at night, by the time I got to that beer, I was nearly falling asleep on the table. But I felt like we made the most of our time, and it was just such an extraordinary experience to travel with a local who also shares my great interest in holy sites. So it really was a marvelous trip. And okay. So I want to say, before I close this up and take a few questions, and I'm going to be writing about this, hopefully in a new book, but I do think that there are things that we can learn from Wales, from this early Celtic Christian tradition that we need in contemporary Christianity. And I think part of it, well, there's a number of things. One is a love for the natural world, a love for out-of-the-way places. As I said, all these holy people who went to the sides of cliffs and who found the Spirit flowing most vividly through the natural world. I think also there is a kind of deep wildness in this early Celtic tradition, and I would say weirdness in a good way too. Some of those stories of St. Winifred who had her head cut off and then restored by her uncle, in some ways you can dismiss those as sort of folklore or myth, but in another way I think that they're part of our shared Christian tradition that I think would be wonderful to bring back. And there are writers, thinkers who are doing this. I think I've mentioned before in a sermon of mine, Martin Shaw, who is a mythologist who lives in England, who is doing some really wonderful writing about sort of the rewilding, as he calls it, of Christianity, and of sort of looking to these older models of, passion and just being on fire with the love of God and the love of nature, and that we have something to learn from these people. I do think there is an irony built into these sites in the British Isles, that if you look at church attendance in the British Isles, it has been going steadily downward. If you've been to England, to cathedrals, churches, you can see that there are not a lot of people there often. I had a lot of conversations with Jennifer about what it was like to be a person of faith in Wales, and she said, sometimes it is difficult because the expectation is if you are an educated person, you will not have any religious affiliation. And she's Unitarian. The Unitarians are not particularly churchy, we would say. And so what she's trying to do is, it was one of the reasons why she invited me to Wales, was try to get the word out about the treasures that they have in Wales, the ways in which we can be inspired by Wales, but also to maybe remind the Welsh people of these spiritual treasures that they have and that they can pay attention to more. I will say one of the reasons why they're so appealing to me is that there aren't a huge number of people there, though. But I don't think, you have to work to get to a lot of these places, and so I don't think they're ever going to be huge tourism destinations like in Rome. But I was very moved by a lot of the places that we went to, and moved by walks that we took. Just a lot of time to think when you're touring these sites in Wales. And so it was a remarkable experience. Thank you, Newsong, for helping to pay for my trip. And I'm happy to open it up to questions, because I think we have a few minutes. Yes, John.
I have on a completely different matter. My 6-year-old grandson was really interested in the World Cup, and he was He had Japan food and he had France food. But he asked at one point, what's Wales food?
I can answer that. A lot of lamb, a lot of the sort of things you would grow in a northern European climate. Barley and they like their sweets too. Welsh cakes it's a kind of oat cake, sort of a cross between sweet and savory. And fish too, especially salmon. Yeah. Yes, please do. Please do.
What's interesting across that northern part is that whole religious trail, okay, and the holy sites you went to. When we were there in 2000, we had, 7 and 9-year-old boys, and we went along that northern part, and every stop was a castle.
Yes. Yeah, the Edwardian castles are all in that same area as well. Yes. Yeah.
Is that because Scotland is to the north?
It wouldn't be Scotland, it would be English. And so it was a way of dominating the Welsh. And so it was King Edward I, I think, who built this ring of castles. Subduing the Welsh. The Welsh had the misfortune to be so close to England. It was so easy to come over into Wales. A little bit harder to get to Scotland and Ireland.
Is that trail that you showed on the map, the red line, you said it's only 25 miles long?
No, about 130 miles, I think.
Is that like the Spanish trail? Do people walk it that way?
Yes. So they're advertising it as the Welsh Camino. And so they are really trying to promote it as one of these great walking routes. And the history is there. It doesn't have quite as much infrastructure. There is a pilgrimage that is done every year at the May bank holiday. I think that's like equivalent of our Memorial Day. And so you can join an organized trip. There's always one that goes on the May holiday. It starts then. But people walk it at any time.
Is it restricted to walking?
No, you can drive. All these places are accessible by road as well.
But the trail itself?
Well, the trail is, it's a hodgepodge. Sometimes you're walking on routes and, on grass and up mountains and sometimes on roads. But Wales, like the rest of the UK, it's a nation of walkers. And so there are, and there's right-of-way there, meaning that people have the right to walk across farmers' fields. And so as long as you can read the ordnance maps, you can go anywhere.
No bikes?
There would be large parts of it that would not be appropriate on a bike. Yeah. Yeah.
I just finished a book of someone who walked lots of the trails around England.
Yes.
So apparently there are walks. And
Yeah.
how does that connect in with their spirituality?
Well, so I think several things. One is there is just this long, long tradition of walking in the British Isles. They make it easy to walk because of the right-of-way laws, and the routes are well worn. I think a lot of English people. We lived in England for a semester 20 years ago. I think for a lot of people, walking is their religion. And I don't mean to denigrate it in that way. It's their spiritual solace and sustenance is to go walking. And I think that is part of the legacy of the Celtic Christian tradition in a lot of places. And I think that it certainly ties into the traditions of pilgrimage, like of the Camino in Spain and the other great walking routes. And a lot of these are coming back. I think, as sort of mainstream Christianity is experiencing, especially in the West, sort of a downturn, then people's longing for spiritual connection does not go away. And I think that pilgrimage, these walking pilgrimages especially, are a way to sort of nurture that impulse. And there are all sorts of stories who people go on one of these long distance walks and have a life-changing experience as a result of it.
Just an observation from what you said. I have not studied this at all. But from what you said, it sounds as though the integration of Christianity, of the against Christianity was really done pretty well, unlike places where
Yes.
colonialism has gone out and just wiped out the local cultures and traditions in order to bring in, what we want to be there. And
Right.
I'm impressed with that. I think
Yeah.
that's
I think that's exactly right. And I think that's one reason why Christianity took such deep roots in Celtic tradition, because it wasn't brought with a sword. It was, or compulsion from a ruler. It was really an organic sort of process. And I think part of it was the tradition of the Druids, that they already had an established class of people who were educated, who respected learning, who had this connection to the natural world. And so, there was a lot of intertwining between those traditions. Yeah, one of the things I quote in my new book is it was Saint Columba, who a lot of people think was a Druid first. He's one of the patron saints of Ireland, and he had funny sort of rules, like if his followers came on a log that had fallen down, that they couldn't harvest it for 9 days. Well, that was going back to the pagan era. He also oriented his oratory, his church, off of, I think usually it would face east, but he faced it another way because he didn't want to cut down any of the trees. And he said, "I fear the fires of hell, but I fear the sound of an axe even more." So he loved trees. And, so that deep, deep love for the natural world is something that we can certainly learn from. Yeah, one more question that I think we're...
I always ask about walking, is the infrastructure good? Well, that path tells you something, okay? I mean, their infrastructure is not paved. I mean, in Wales, what we would consider almost a footpath like this, one lane, is a 2-lane road, okay? And handrails and so on, like we have, roads.
Yeah. So I would say that if you do happen to be interested in going on a trip to Wales, Jennifer and I were sort of kicking around the idea that maybe we would offer a tour, and we decided not to for a number of reasons. One is, it's not a country that's made for like group tours, because small, the idea of getting even a van down some of these roads is really intimidating. But it certainly is a place where you could identify like 5 of these places and plan out a route. Like I said, it's only the size of New Jersey. And so you would have to be able to drive a car or hire a driver when you were there. There really is no... And it's on the other side of the road, yeah.
That our marriage survived the honeymoon, driving stick shift on the wrong side of the road is a real...
Yeah, that's right. Good for you. Well, if you have other questions, I'm happy to talk to you about it, but thank you for going to Wales with me. So, yeah.
Lori, what's the closest parallel to doing such a pilgrimage in the U.S.?
Well, I would say maybe Chimayo in New Mexico, which is a Spanish